The day she walked into the mansion, she was carrying a bucket, a worn pair of rubber gloves, and enough pain in her heart to fill every empty room inside it. She had come because she needed a job. She had no idea that before the week was over, the lonely man who lived behind those enormous gates would look at her not as a cleaner, not as an employee, but as the one person who had somehow brought his dead heart back to life. And neither of them knew that the same house she had entered to clean would eventually become the place where two broken people discovered that love sometimes arrives wearing the simplest clothes. Before we begin this emotional journey, if you believe that kindness can heal wounds, that people deserve second chances, and that love can find us when we least expect it, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us bring more stories of kindness, courage, and second chances. The mansion stood at the end of a long private road surrounded by tall iron gates and perfectly trimmed trees. Its windows reflected the gray afternoon sky, and the enormous stone walls made the place look less like a home and more like a fortress. For 3 years, almost nobody had entered through those gates except employees who came and left quickly. The owner had become known in the city as a successful businessman, a man who had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing and who seemed to have everything a person could possibly want. But wealth had not made him happy. If anything, it had made his loneliness easier to hide. His name was Daniel Carter. He was 42 years old, disciplined, intelligent, and respected by nearly everyone who knew him professionally. Business magazines called him ruthless. Competitors called him impossible to defeat. His employees admired his determination but were careful around him because they rarely saw him smile. He lived alone in a mansion with 12 bedrooms, though he used only 3 rooms regularly. The dining table could seat 14 people, but most nights he ate dinner at one end of it without speaking to anyone. 3 years earlier, Daniel had lost his wife, Emily, after a sudden illness. Her death had not only taken away the woman he loved, it had taken away the version of himself that had existed before grief. He had stopped inviting friends over. He stopped attending family gatherings. He stopped celebrating birthdays. Even the photographs of Emily that once filled the house had slowly disappeared into drawers and closets because looking at them hurt too much. Then came the second blow. Daniel had a younger brother named Michael, who had been his closest friend since childhood. Michael had helped Daniel build his company during its difficult early years. But after Emily died, Michael became seriously ill. Daniel spent months traveling between business meetings and hospital rooms, trying desperately to save the only family member he had left. Nothing worked. Michael died less than a year later. After that, Daniel simply withdrew. His mansion became silent. His heart became even more silent. Meanwhile, across town, a 29-year-old woman named Clara Bennett was fighting a completely different battle. Clara had never dreamed of cleaning other people's homes. She had once been a student at a small community college, studying early childhood education. She loved children and had hoped to become a teacher. But life had a cruel way of interrupting dreams. Her father died unexpectedly when she was 22, leaving behind unpaid bills and a mother whose health had begun to decline. Clara abandoned school and started working wherever she could. For several years, she worked at a small hotel, cleaning rooms and washing laundry. The pay was barely enough, but it kept food on the table. Then her mother became seriously ill. Medical expenses consumed Clara's savings. She borrowed money. She sold the few valuable things she owned. She worked double shifts. And still, it wasn't enough. One rainy morning, Clara received a phone call informing her that the hotel was closing temporarily because of financial problems. She had lost her job. For a few seconds, she simply sat on the edge of her narrow bed staring at the wall. There was less than $100 in her bank account. Her mother's medicine was due in 2 days. The landlord had already warned her about the rent. And there was no one left to call. That evening, while searching through local employment listings at a small library, Clara noticed an advertisement. Housekeeper wanted. Private residence. Excellent pay. Immediate start. The location made her pause. She recognized the address. Everyone in the city knew the mansion belonged to Daniel Carter. Clara almost ignored the advertisement because she had heard stories about him. People said he was cold. Some said he was arrogant. Others claimed he barely spoke to his staff. But the salary was nearly 3 times what she had earned at the hotel. Clara stared at the screen for a long time. Then she whispered to herself that pride could wait. Her mother's medicine could not. The next morning, she arrived at the mansion wearing a simple navy sweater, black trousers, and old but clean shoes. Her brown hair was tied neatly behind her head. She carried a small bag containing her identification, a notebook, and a pair of gloves. The gates opened slowly. As Clara walked toward the enormous front door, she felt a strange pressure in her chest. She was nervous. Very nervous. But she didn't know that behind that door was a man who was about to change her life. Daniel interviewed her in a large study. He didn't ask many questions. He looked at her application, asked about her previous experience, and then looked toward the window. Clara noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. It surprised her. She had expected arrogance. Instead, she saw sadness. The interview lasted less than 10 minutes. She got the job. Her first assignment was simple: clean the entire lower floor. Daniel told her that she could use the kitchen and laundry room, but she should stay out of his private office unless necessary. Clara nodded. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask about his family. She didn't ask why a man who owned such a beautiful house looked like he hadn't slept properly in years. She simply went to work. For the first few hours, Daniel barely noticed her. He sat in his office reading reports. The housekeeper moved quietly through the mansion. But Clara wasn't like the cleaners who had worked there before. She didn't simply dust surfaces and vacuum floors. She noticed things. She noticed that the flowers in the entrance hall were dead. She replaced them. She noticed that the kitchen refrigerator was nearly empty. She made a grocery list. She noticed that the dining room curtains were permanently closed. She opened them. She noticed that the house was filled with expensive furniture but almost no warmth. So she began making small changes. Nothing dramatic. Just little things. A fresh vase of flowers. Clean windows. Warm lamps instead of harsh overhead lights. A bowl of fruit on the kitchen counter. A freshly baked loaf of bread. Daniel noticed. He didn't say anything. But he noticed. One evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. He found Clara sitting on the kitchen floor. She was crying. For a moment, he stood there silently. Clara quickly wiped her face and stood. She apologized and tried to explain that she had received a difficult phone call. Daniel asked if everything was all right. She said her mother was sick and she was worried about the cost of her medication. Something changed in Daniel's expression. He understood that kind of fear. The fear of losing someone. The helplessness of watching a loved one suffer while desperately searching for a solution. He didn't offer her money. He didn't make a grand gesture. Instead, he simply told her that she could take the evening off. Clara thanked him. But before leaving, she noticed a small photograph on the kitchen counter. It showed Daniel standing beside a smiling woman. His wife. Clara didn't ask about her. She simply said that the woman looked happy. Daniel looked at the photograph. For the first time in years, he didn't immediately hide it. He said that she was. Then he walked away. That night, Daniel sat alone in his bedroom and realized something strange. He had spoken about Emily without feeling angry. It still hurt. But somehow, saying that she had been happy felt different. The following weeks changed the atmosphere inside the mansion. Clara became part of its rhythm. She arrived at 8 every morning. She cleaned. She cooked simple meals. She watered the plants. She opened the curtains. And somehow, without trying, she brought life back into a house that had forgotten what life felt like. Daniel began coming home earlier. At first, he told himself it was because he needed to review documents. Then he started eating in the kitchen instead of the dining room. Sometimes Clara would be preparing dinner while Daniel sat at the counter answering emails. They rarely spoke about anything personal. But their silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. One afternoon, Clara found Daniel sitting in the garden staring at an old wooden bench. She recognized the sadness in his face. She learned later that Emily had loved that bench. It had been where they used to sit together every Sunday morning. Clara didn't interrupt him. She simply placed a cup of coffee on the small table beside him and walked away. Daniel looked at the coffee. Then toward her. That small act affected him more than any speech could have. She hadn't asked what was wrong. She hadn't tried to fix his grief. She had simply understood that sometimes people need someone nearby without needing questions. Days passed.